The stories. This highway turnout kept a missing trucker's toll receipt. The turnout sits between scrub pines and a windblown ditch, and it held a toll receipt longer than anyone realized. The receipt came from a night when a driver stopped for 6 quiet minutes, then disappeared beyond the concrete barriers. Dorian Hale worked highway maintenance for the county, age 37, and he took pride in simple, measurable things. His Thursday assignment was routine line checks, with a side errand to clear debris from an overflow grate near the eastbound turnout. The morning felt ordinary as he idled the orange pickup, sipped gas station coffee, and clipped a laminated checklist to his clipboard. He pulled on gloves, set cones, then walked the shoulder counting reflective posts, and he hummed a tune he could not place. At the turnout, he knelt by the grated culvert, where stray plastic and crushed cans made a soggy stripe against rusted mesh. A folded paper showed only a blue stripe and a timestamp smudged by rain. The paper was stiff, thin, and heat-printed, the kind used at toll plazas that still handed cash change. He eased it open with a screwdriver tip, read a plaza name he recognized, and traced a time almost exactly 2 years back. The fare matched a commercial axle count, and a faint pen mark read Brandt in shaky block letters. Dorian knew the surname because his father still kept a clipped article about a driver named Silas Brandt. The story said a veteran hauler left a warehouse near midnight, then failed to deliver a load of drywall and never returned calls. Investigators canvassed truck stops, pulled camera footage, and searched an exit ramp pond where a guardrail once stood bent. The county replaced that rail within a week, and Dorian helped pour the new anchors under a bitter early spring sky. He remembered the way troopers scanned the water with side-scan gear, and he remembered a family photo taped to a utility pole. The picture showed a smiling man with deep crow feet lines, wearing a ball cap shaped by years of Sunday. He set the receipt on the warm truck hood, and he felt a nervous pull he did not want to ignore. He radioed dispatch for a non-emergency inquiry, explained he found what looked like a toll slip, and requested guidance from the patrol office. The operator took his badge number, logged the time, and said an investigator would call once she could review the old case file. The call came after lunch from an investigator named Fenna Ortiz, who spoke carefully but asked direct questions. She confirmed the surname matched the missing driver, and she asked Dorian to secure the paper in a clean envelope. She told him to keep working as usual because she needed to check archived calls and bridge camera timestamps before driving out. He locked the receipt in a plastic map pouch, finished the grate work, then walked the turnout with a slower, sharper eye. The asphalt showed faint striations where heavy rigs often idled, and a single bolt head gleamed bright against dull gravel. A cracked mirror shard lay half buried near the weeds, reflecting a tuft of cloud that moved like something alive. He logged the shard as debris, snapped a photo with a timestamp, and saved it among his maintenance images from earlier weeks. The images, he realized, showed the same corner of concrete week after week, and the corner looked slightly cleaner today. That thought returned him to the culvert, where the receipt had been wedged behind a lip most drivers never noticed. The patrol cruiser pulled up near too, and Investigator Ortiz stepped out carrying a clipboard and a small camera. She was mid-40s, concise, and she asked for the sequence from his arrival to the moment he opened the folded paper. He described the gloves, the screwdriver tip, the awkward angle at the grate, and the exact place where the paper caught. She photographed the culvert, the hood of his truck, and his gloves, then placed the receipt in a fresh evidence sleeve. She asked whether he had heard of any scavengers or roadside sellers who might pick through turnouts in quiet hours. He shook his head and mentioned night fishermen at the quarry road and a retired lineman who walked his dog near dawn. Ortiz had already checked dispatch logs from the night Silas vanished, and those logs showed 2 calls near that turnout. One came from a motorist reporting a stalled box truck on the shoulder, which cleared itself before a trooper arrived. The second came from a bridge camera technician, noting a brief outage around 2:12, which was dismissed as routine. She asked permission to pull Dorian's maintenance photos, the ones covering every week around the 2-year mark. He agreed without hesitation and forwarded the entire folder, even the blurry shots he usually deleted at the office. Ortiz scrolled methodically, then paused on an image taken exactly 3 days after the reported outage at the bridge camera. The photo showed the same culvert, same weed line, and a crumpled label half hidden under wet pine needles. Ortiz zoomed until the pixels blurred, then noted a fragment that looked like the corner of a toll slip. She compared that week to the next, where the culvert looked cleaner, then to the next, where more wind-blown trash filled the grid again. Dorian pointed toward the bright bolt he noticed earlier, which did not appear in his older photos at all. Ortiz crouched and confirmed the bolt was new stainless, fixed through a small angle bracket that sat flush to the curb. She said the bracket was not standard for that guardrail style, and it looked like something installed to anchor a temporary brace. They walked the rail from cone to cone, and she stopped at a spot where the soil sloped into a greasy black ribbon. The smell suggested old brake dust and gear oil, and the vegetation showed a flattened path that looked more deliberate than random. She made a note to have a canine unit sweep the embankment later, and she radioed for a drone with a thermal camera. Across the turnout, a small convenience store faced the service road, and a metal bell chimed when the door opened. The clerk on duty was a woman named Karen Duplessis, age 29, who brewed coffee and stocked shelves during quiet afternoons. She said plenty of trucks idled at that turnout, but she remembered a white day cab sitting without a trailer once. Karen produced a spiral notebook where she kept odd notes to settle change disputes and lottery recollections. On a page dated 2 years back, she wrote, "Night truck, no trailer, short man, hat, hands shaking, paid in cash for cigarettes." She told them the man left a toll receipt on the counter by accident, then grabbed it quickly and stuffed it into his jacket. Ortiz photographed the notebook and asked about timing, and Karen said she wrote the note after midnight while the bell still echoed. She admitted she might be off by 20 minutes. But she remembered the man said something that felt like a warning. He said the word toll like it mattered. Then he asked if anyone was working late at the bridge control shed. The bridge control shed sat above the river, spanned 3 miles east, where cameras watched traffic and signboards scrolled travel times. Ortiz called a former technician named Orville Pacheco, age 62, who kept his own notes in a faded green ledger. He said he logged an unexpected visit that same night. When a man in a reflective vest asked for camera reset access, Orville said the visitor showed a badge sleeve without a badge, which made him cautious, and he refused to grant access. He called the after-hours line to report a vendor mismatch, and the line recorded his message with the time he spoke. The line, according to archived records, Ortiz had already pulled, captured footsteps, a door-open sound, and muffled traffic noise. They returned to the turnout while the drone lifted into a steady grid pattern, and Ortiz asked Dorian for his honest read. He believed the receipt had stayed near that lip for months, then shifted forward during a recent heavy storm last spring. The spidering of dirt on the paper edges matched the way silt moves when culverts push water hard toward daylight. The drone operator flagged a heat anomaly under the slope where the grease ribbon angled into brush and sage. A buried object held temperature longer than the surrounding dirt, and its shape suggested a long chassis with a missing rear section. Dorian stared at the screen while Ortiz arranged a small excavation crew and a wrecker with a winch and safety chains. The bucket peeled turf like old cloth, revealing crumpled metal painted white and a scraped cereal plate near a crushed step. The cab had separated from a frame that showed clean-cut ends, not torn ends, and Dorian felt his stomach tighten hard. The clean ends suggested someone removed the trailer hardware with purpose, then eased the cab down the slope intentionally. Ortiz called the medical examiner and the state commercial unit, then stepped away to speak to a number marked confidential. She returned with a firm face and told Dorian she needed one more favor while crews secured the scene. She asked him to drive to the scrapyard 2 exits west, where way logs sometimes kept more truth than anyone expected. At the yard, a supervisor named Harlan Voss, age 55, carried a tablet loaded with camera stills and cash tickets. He said people brought cut frames to his scale weekly, and he flagged one ticket dated 3 days after the reported outage. The still showed a flatbed hauling a truck frame section without a cab, strapped tight with chains and cheap ratchet binders. The driver wore a reflective vest, a hat pulled low, and gloves that looked new, and his hands seemed unsteady at the counter. Harlan remembered the hands because the driver dropped a toll receipt while counting bills, then apologized like he was late for something else. The camera caught the corner of the paper, and the blue stripe matched the one on Dorian's find. Ortiz requested the original video and the ticket, then compared plate numbers with the state registry and commercial inspections. The plate belonged to a hauler who reported his flatbed stolen for one night, then found it returned with fresh chain marks. He never filed a full report because the trailer came back clean, and he feared insurance delays could wreck his month. Piece by piece, a picture formed that did not look like a ghost or a river taking what it wanted. A driver left a warehouse near midnight, stopped at the turnout, and met someone who needed the cab but not the frame. The someone posed as a camera contractor, killed a low-priority feed, then arranged to hide a cab where eyes rarely linger long. The twist came from a small sticker inside the cab roof, which a trooper peeled away from dust with a gentle thumb. It showed a fleet service company that kept neat records, including oil changes, mileage notes, and a knack for precise dates. Their files showed work performed 2 weeks before the disappearance, and the mechanic wrote a side note about a key copy. The mechanic wrote that a third key was requested by a man who said he was the night dispatcher, and he paid in cash. The mechanic thought nothing of it until Ortiz called. Then he remembered the man never signed the usual authorization line. The shop camera showed the man wearing a vest like a contractor, and the badge sleeve again appeared strangely empty. Ortiz pulled toll plaza footage from the night in question and synchronized it with the scrapyard stills and the bridge notes. The day cab crossed the plaza as expected, and the timestamp matched the receipt tucked in the culvert lip. The truck exited near the turnout, camera glare washed the lane, then resumed with a frame that missed a single clear license view. Witness statements placed a white day cab idling without a trailer, and a clerk recorded restless hands that left a paper corner. A technician refused an access request, and a maintenance line captured footsteps and a door open sound after the call ended. A stolen flatbed left and returned in a narrow window, and a cut frame crossed a scale with a driver who spoke softly. The medical examiner recovered remains from the cab, and dental records from a previous injury matched a profile kept by his dentist. The family received a closed answer shaped like sorrow rather than speculation, because speculation had gnawed at them for years. The drywall load had been simple, the route had been familiar, and the end had hidden in a slope beside a lonely turnout. Motive came faster than Dorian guessed, and it turned on a small insurance clause that rewarded a competing carrier. The person posing as a contractor had worked for that carrier briefly, then left a digital trail of stolen dispatch templates. He understood cameras, toll patterns, and how to bend the timing of people who worked graveyard shifts with tired eyes. Ortiz did not say solved aloud in front of anyone, and she used the gentle phrasing investigators save for families who have waited. She told them the discovery was due to a maintenance worker who kept notes, who walked slowly, and who refused to shrug. She mentioned the receipt that waited in a lip everyone missed, and she promised it would be handled with care. A week later, Dorian returned to the turnout with a new grate and a broom because he wanted the place to look tended. He replaced the odd bracket with the correct plate, tightened the bright bolt, and brushed the concrete until the dust lifted. Cars hissed past, and a train horn carried from somewhere distant, and the ditch water moved with a plain, steady sound. He thought about simple, measurable things as he loaded the cones and folded his checklist, and the tune finally came back. His father used to whistle that tune while changing oil in a gravel driveway under a high summer Sunday. He stood quietly, listened to wind in the pines, and let the ordinary noise of the road remind him why details matter. Karen's notebook went back under the counter, Orville's green ledger returned to a shelf, and the scrapyard ticket stayed scanned. The river cameras got a new maintenance sticker with a fresh signature line, and technicians added a habit of requesting 2 verifications. The county posted a small plaque at the turnout with no names, only a line about patience and careful work. When Dorian passed that spot after later storms, he slowed as a reflex, and he watched small things settle where gravity pointed. He understood that places remember without meaning to, and that a crumpled paper can hold a night in its faded stripe. He started stopping for coffee at the store more often, just to say hello and to count the steady ring of the doorbell. The road kept moving, trucks kept downshifting on the grade, and the turnout regained its ordinary shabbiness in summer heat. Dorian did not tell the whole story to anyone at the diner, and he did not dramatize what the cable hooks revealed. He kept the memory in the quiet pocket of workdays, where tools sat cleaned in their tray and notes lined up square. There was no miracle in any of it, only a patient chain of human attention passed hand to hand without ceremony. The receipt was not miraculous either, it was simply patient, wedged where water and wind forgot to sweep. A missing driver got his name back in a single sentence, and a family traded uncertainty for grief that could finally breathe. Years will pass, and that turnout will keep catching wrappers and leaves, and a worker will kneel to clear them. Someone will hum without knowing why, and maybe remember how a small slip of paper can outweigh a rumor. The place will not speak, yet it will still hold that long night in the print of its concrete, quiet as a held breath. Dorian drove away as shadows crossed the lane markers and the orange hood flashed twice in the side mirror. He felt lighter and heavier at the same time, which is how truth can sit after it finally finds a home. He did not chase the tune anymore, and he did not rush the checklist, because patient work had already taught him what mattered today. He believed there were other receipts under other lips somewhere, and he hoped other hands would take them gently. He kept his camera roll tidy, his gloves clean, and his pencil sharp enough to write down what needed remembering. The turnout stayed ordinary when he left, but the ordinary held a story now, and that felt exactly right. The stories. Motel room key log raised a warning at noon. The motel stood behind a tired strip mall where the highway bent east, and the room key log flagged a warning at noon. The manager said it had never done that for a single guest before, and the front desk software timestamp looked clean. Tamsin Rourke was 38, and she worked as a freelance transcriptionist who liked quiet rooms near highways. She checked in after a morning dental appointment, and she asked for a corner room away from the ice machine. Her plan was simple and forgettable, and she would upload 2 interviews before dinner without distractions. She had a cheap grocery salad chilling in the mini fridge, and she set her laptop near the lamp. The incident started when she left for a quick walk along the frontage road, and she returned before lunch. The red light on the lock blinked twice when she placed her key. And then the handle felt sticky for a second. She slid the key again, and the green light appeared, and the door opened without resistance. Something in the room felt slightly wrong, and her neat habits made that feeling hard to dismiss. Her notebook sat an inch off its earlier square alignment, and the privacy latch hung down at a different angle. The remote was upside down on the bed runner, and the curtains were parted just enough to show the lot. She did not panic, and she checked the window first, then the bathroom, then the closet. Nothing obvious was missing, and nothing valuable looked disturbed, and the safe still clicked with the same code. The manager, a steady man named Carriam Doss with a careful way of talking, came up with a portable printer. He said the lock system kept an audit trail, and he could print the last 50 entries for peace of mind. He pressed a button on the encoder box, and a strip of paper fed out with lines that looked like a receipt. He pointed at a line that read, "Warning at 12:00," and he frowned at the code beside it. Kariam said the warning usually meant repeated wrong keys, or a master key used in the wrong sequence. He asked whether she had trouble at the door, and she said the first swipe was odd, but it finally worked. He said housekeeping had not reached the swing yet, and the schedule showed rooms 5 through 10 blocked for later. He also said maintenance had no work orders near her room, and the pool pump had their focus today. Tamsin asked for a copy of the printout, and he tore the strip carefully and handed it to her. He said the desk software would mirror the entries, and the access times should match the paper record. He offered to change her room, and she said she preferred to stay if he could figure out the timing. She needed to finish her files, and moving would cost an hour of careful setup that already worked. He left to check the system downstairs, and she began a small investigation with habits learned from years of odd jobs. She took pictures of the desk layout, and she wrote down the position of the remote and notebook. She opened the fridge and felt the salad lid, and condensation traced the shape of her thumb. She photographed the hallway from her doorway, and she watched the corner mirror for anyone watching her room. Her phone showed an unknown missed call at 11:59, and the voicemail held only air and a soft tap. The timestamp placed the call 1 minute before noon, and that matched the printed warning by chance or design. She saved the file and wrote voicemail at 11:59 on a sticky note, then kept going. She recorded a short clip of the lock blinking pattern, and she took a still of the latch angle. Kariam returned with a more complex explanation, and he looked both apologetic and curious. He said the central software showed 4 events around noon, and 2 were standard heartbeat checks. He said the third line was the warning, and the fourth line was her successful entry. He said the heartbeat checks were normal, and his vendor insisted those never touched the door memory. She asked who else had access to the master keys, and he listed his assistant and the head housekeeper. He said the shift had started late because of a staffing issue, and nobody had departed the laundry room until after the storm warning cleared. He looked out the window for a second, and the clouds were breaking over the lot. He said he could pull camera footage of the hall, and he offered to show her right away. They stood in a back office that smelled like detergent, and a small monitor rendered yesterday like a shaky stage. The hallway camera faced the vending alcove, and her door showed only as a sliver to the right. She could see the housekeeping cart parked across from a stairwell, and the garbage bag over its handle moved like a slow flag. She could also see the timestamp in the corner, and it froze now and then. Karim scrubbed to 11:58, and the hallway stayed empty except for a flicker near her door. He paused and rewound, and the ghost of a reflection crossed the chrome of the vending machine. The time stamped 12:00 when a shadow fell across the carpet, and then the monitor hiccuped through 4 frames. When it recovered, the cart stood an inch closer to the stairwell, and a candy bar wrapper twitched near the baseboard. He said the recorder sometimes skipped frames when the network hiccuped, and the storm probably did that earlier too. He said he would export the clip for backup, and he pressed a key that made the machine work. He printed another lock log at the front desk, and he noticed the codes looked different than the hallway printer. He muttered that the right column no longer showed the same vendor identifiers. Then he shrugged. Tamsin stayed gentle but persistent, and she asked for the front desk call records for the last 2 hours. He logged into the phone system and printed a list, and the sheet showed her incoming call at 11:59. He said the number looked like a regional call center trunk, and he did not recognize the exchange. He also pointed to a call from housekeeping to the desk at 11:47, and the note field read linens. She walked back to the room and pushed the privacy latch up, and she placed a glass against the door to hold it steady. She laid the 2 printouts side by side and traced the times with a pen, and she felt the rhythm of a pattern. The warning line sat like a pivot between routine checks, and the voicemail landed like a pebble against glass. She put her ear to the door and listened for wheels, then returned to the desk. Her own notes from the morning had a small clue that now felt louder, and she leaned into it. The motel website had listed check-in at 3, and the desk allowed 11 that day after a phone request. She remembered the clerk saying the system was fussy about early openings, and he had to enable the room manually. She asked whether that action wrote to the door, and he had said it usually did not write outside the server. She decided to create a timeline using what she had, and she kept her sentences short inside her head. She wrote walk begins at 11:25, and she wrote return at 11:58 by phone clock. She marked unknown call at 11:59, and she marked warning at noon per log. She marked successful entry after noon, and she left a space under the hallway camera skip. She started checking external sources that could anchor the minute hand, and she searched for weather alerts. The city office had posted a gust advisory that morning, and the timestamp read 11:49 on the archive page. The motel shared the notice on a social feed, and that repost time read 11:52. She noted those times and circled the hallway camera skip, then took another breath. 2 doors down, a long-term guest named Felton Jarvie stepped out with a laundry bag, and he watched her writing with polite curiosity. He wore a maintenance polo from a utility company, and his hands were clean in a careful way. He asked if everything was all right, and she said the door log showed a warning while she was gone. He said he heard a tap near noon from her door, and he thought it was someone knocking softly. Felton told her he had walked past the vending alcove at 11:55, and the housekeeping cart was not there then. He said the head housekeeper usually parked by the elevator, and moving the cart to the stairwell meant a quick run. He said the stairwell door sometimes stuck in humid weather, and people jiggled it with hip or shoulder. He offered that detail without drama, and he returned to his laundry with a nod. She wrote, witness heard soft tap near noon, and she wrote cart location changed between 11:55 and noon. She returned to the office and asked Karim whether any staff used the stairwell before lunch. He said the head housekeeper clocked a call to the desk for linens at 11:47, and she likely went down the stairs to the supply room. He said he could ask her directly, and he picked up the radio. The head housekeeper, a brisk woman named Vina Ortega, arrived with a ring of keys and an honest face. She said she did not touch room 9 that morning, and she stayed focused on laundry because 2 new hires were out. She said she parked the cart by the stairwell at around 11:56, and she ran down for pillowcases. She said she saw a man on the landing who said he was looking for the ice machine. Vina described the man in a way that felt practical, and Tamsin wrote each point without rushing. He wore a light jacket with a stitched logo that looked like a mountain, and he carried a slim plastic folder. He kept his head down when he passed her, and he said something like, "Sorry, wrong turn," in a low voice. Vina said she did not see him after that moment, and she returned with pillowcases within 2 minutes. Karim asked whether the man entered any rooms, and Vina said no with a clear shake of her head. She added that the folder looked like those carriers used by sales reps who drop off rate sheets, and she shrugged. Tamsin asked if any vendors had appointments scheduled around noon, and Karim checked a clipboard near the computer. He said a door lock vendor had promised a firmware push window this week, and the note read, "Watch for noon checks." He called the vendor number from the contract, and a recorded line explained a service window had occurred overnight earlier that week. The recording mentioned that local controllers might resynchronize during the next heartbeat, and some systems would show noon test entries. It said the entries should not appear as warnings, and any warning codes indicated a local misconfiguration with time settings. Karim put the phone down slowly and exhaled. This turned the printed warning into something less mysterious and more technical, and yet the soft tap and shifted items remained. Tamsin asked whether the motel had shifted clocks recently, and he said they had updated everything after a power blink in late spring. He said the head housekeeper never touched the controller closet, and only he and the assistant manager had the key. He said the assistant was off-site today, and the key hung in his pocket. Tamsin asked for the stairwell camera if available, and he said that stairwell lacked coverage by an inch of budget. She asked whether a rear door camera covered the bottom of those stairs, and he nodded with measured relief. They pulled up the rear camera, and a narrow view showed the delivery alley and a sliver of the stairwell door. The timestamp now froze less often, and the light shifted across an oil stain like a lazy sundial. At 11:58 by the camera clock, the stairwell door opened just enough to spill a thin triangle of light. A figure in a light jacket stepped into the frame, and the stitched logo matched Vina's description by shape. He held a slim plastic folder against his side, and the posture looked like someone carrying documents that should not bend. He walked toward the alley exit, and he kept his head angled away from the lens. Karim printed the clip details and wrote down the frame references, and he looked grateful for the anchor. He called the city non-emergency line and reported a suspicious trespass with time and description, and he received a reference number. Tamsin stayed in the office while he spoke, and she scanned the clip again for details that might connect. The jacket logo looked familiar, and she leaned closer to the screen. She remembered a flyer in the lobby about avalanche readiness training from a regional outdoor store, and the mountain logo resembled that brand. She found a photo of the flyer in her morning snapshots, and the triangles of the logo matched in a crude way. She wrote possible brand match on her notes, and then she reconsidered the cleaner explanation. She asked whether any delivery drivers wore similar jackets from a local supplier. Karim said a laundry service delivered on Tuesdays, and their shirts had a wave rather than a peak. He said a copier technician had visited last month, and his vest reflected light in bright stripes. He also said a door lock vendor rep had visited in 2019, and that rep carried a thin folder and spoke softly. He pointed to an old business card taped inside a drawer, and the logo on the card was a shield. Tamsin returned to the voicemail and listened again, and the soft tap in the recording felt more like a brushed microphone. She increased the playback speed, and the hiss changed pattern, and the tap now sounded like a door meeting a frame. She looked at the lock and imagined someone swiping a card and bumping the door with a shoulder, then backing off. The warning at noon could align with an invalid swipe, and the soft tap could be that bump. She compared the hallway camera skip with the rear camera movement, and a pattern gained weight. The hallway camera froze near noon exactly when the stairwell door opened downstairs, and the network load could explain that. The housekeeping cart shift lined up with Vina jogging to the supply room, and the man could have slipped past as she turned. The voicemail hit her phone as the man reached the bottom door, and the network jitter added noise. She also checked her own photos from the morning, and one showed the privacy latch at a different angle before she left. The after image showed the latch touching a scuff on the frame, and the before image left a finger of space. That meant someone likely opened the door enough to disturb the latch, then reset it with an unfamiliar hand. The remote upside down could be a subtle cue of a rushed search or simply clumsy housekeeping. The twist arrived when she noticed the line at the very top of the first printout, and she traced it with her pen. The header used a 2-letter time zone label that did not match the server region, and the offset would shift noon by 1 hour. The rear camera time showed one set of minutes, and the hallway printer showed another set on a slightly different clock. That meant the warning at noon really pointed to 11, and her walk covered that window. She told Karyam that the warning might mask an entry a few minutes earlier, and he nodded slowly as the idea settled. He pulled the controller settings and found a daylight rule applied twice, and the vendor menu allowed only one checkbox. He disabled the duplicate flag and printed a fresh log, and the warning line now read 11:58 after correction. That timestamp matched the voicemail and the rear camera movement on the dot. With the corrected time, the man in the jacket appeared at the stairs exactly when her door reacted, and the picture sharpened. Vina confirmed her quick run for pillowcases at 11:56 by wristwatch memory, and Felton's soft knock memory seemed solid enough. Karyam called the non-emergency line again with the refined time and the clearer description, and the dispatcher thanked him for the update. Later that afternoon, a patrol unit stopped by and reviewed the printed clips and the fixed audit trail, and they asked simple questions. They said a regional scam had targeted small motels by posing as vendor reps, and the goal was to test doors for forgotten valuables. They said the suspects favored just-checked rooms with early occupancy, and a front desk distraction sometimes played a part. They took the folder details and the logo sketch and said they would file a report. Tamsin finished her interviews with the door double-latched, and she kept one eye on the hallway mirror when grabbing ice. She moved her wallet to the safe and spread her notes across the desk, and the scene felt accountable now. She typed a short summary with exact times and saved every photo twice, and she kept the lock printouts flat under the clip. She handed copies to Karyam before dinner, and he thanked her in a tired voice. Before she slept, she replayed the day with a practical mind, and she measured her fears against the evidence. The door lock warning at noon had sounded alarming and mysterious, and the correction removed some dramatic weight. The network's skips created suspicion, yet they explained themselves when matched with weather alerts and stairwell footage. The man in the jacket had moved like a test rather than a charge, and his exit suggested caution over violence. The next morning, a call from the dispatcher confirmed a minor break at another motel, and the description matched the jacket and folder. They said nobody was hurt, and they had recovered a similar audit trail with the same duplicate daylight setting. They asked for permission to retain Karyam's clips for training, and he agreed after printing a release form. The report would remain bland and useful, and that felt right for everyone involved. Tamsin returned the key at the desk and asked for a printed receipt with checkout time, and she tucked it carefully away. Karyam had fixed the controller settings and ordered a second camera for the stairwell, and he looked relieved. He said he would schedule a vendor review of the master key sequence, and he promised to retrain the desk on early room openings. He thanked her again for being patient and methodical, and his posture finally eased. She drove away with the highway steady and uncomplicated, and the motel shrank in the rear view until it was another box. She told herself that most mysteries feel bigger when unnamed, and this one had a tidy frame now. The log had raised a warning at noon, yet the truth landed minutes earlier, and the whole story hung by a misaligned clock. She kept the copies in a folder labeled Motel Room Audit, and she let the day be ordinary again. The stories. The night guard, who logged footsteps beneath the church basement. He logged the first footsteps at 2:14, then again at 3:05, and nothing about those times made sense. The basement lights stayed off, the motion sensor blinked idle green, yet something moved under the concrete where no hallway existed. The night guard was named Alaric Boone, age 54, a retired freight dispatcher who took quiet work after his divorce. He covered the overnight shift at a weathered church on a bluff, a place with a gym, a pantry, and a low stone basement. His simple goal for that Tuesday was making rounds, checking doors, keeping the coffee hot, and finishing a crossword before sunrise. During his second loop, he heard the first set, a faint two-beat rhythm under the boiler room, steady and human. He froze by the cinder block wall, his pencil lifted, and he realized he could feel the vibration through his shoes. He marked the time in his pocket notebook, then radioed a single check-in to keep the board honest. The church sat near a small river where old mills once ran, and tunnels stitched the slope like forgotten seams. He had heard stories from lunch volunteers about a coal chute, a dumbwaiter, even a choir passage sealed long ago. None of those old features mapped exactly to the boiler room, which sat on fresh concrete poured after a flood in 2005. Alaric finished the round and told himself it was heat pipes, which seemed reasonable, though the tempo was wrong. The boiler was off to save fuel, set to wait closer to dawn, and the thermostats showed a flat night. He waited near the fuse panel and heard it again, slow steps south to north, then quiet like someone listening. He walked upstairs and checked the parking lot, which held a single sedan from a choir tenor who worked late. Across the street, the antique shop was dark, its sign unlit, the display of rotary phones a grid of dust. The guard wrote the second time down, circled it, and added a question mark he would rather have avoided. He kept a clean log because writing straight helped his nerves. A trick learned dispatching trucks through winter storms. His notebook already listed door tests, flashlight levels, and notes about the food pantry deliveries with initials and counts. Now it held two odd entries about a place that should have been solid fill and reinforced slab. On Wednesday, he set a baseline, because the simplest first step is confirming the pattern before trying explanations. He arrived 10 minutes early, brewed coffee, and walked the perimeter before the staff left and the alarms armed. He chalked a thin line along the boiler room floor, just a mark to see if any hairline crack shifted. At 2:17, he felt the same two-beat rhythm. Heel, then toe, careful, like someone stepping between puddles. It moved toward the old pantry wall, paused, then returned, and he heard a small scrape, as if brushing stone. He checked the chalk line and found nothing disturbed, which frustrated him more than if he had found scuffs. He called the on-call contact listed as Pastor Lionel Cade, age 61, a spare-voiced man who rarely slept. The pastor answered and said the church once tied into a storm culvert and the city sealed it after floods. He added that the map might be wrong, since old projects drifted from paperwork when donations moved faster than permits. The footsteps returned at 3:11, and he recorded them by holding his phone against the wall, letting the mic listen. The audio picked up a rhythmic, bassy thump and a single metal tick, like a ring hitting a pipe. He labeled the file with the date and the time and sent it to himself because he backed up everything. On Thursday, he walked the block in the afternoon and spoke with Rhea Voss, age 47, the daytime custodian. She said a volunteer once mentioned a hatch under the choir risers, then shrugged and said that was before her time. She also said a city crew excavated near the alley last winter, chasing a water pressure loss on the block. He pulled the Public Works hotline and asked for archived lines, using calm words and the steady cadence that gets patience. The operator routed him to records, where an email arrived with basic utility diagrams marked revised after 2005. The drawing placed a retired branch running 30 feet under the church, labeled Service Abandoned with a faint dotted spur. He printed the map and folded it into his pocket, then took his shift with a small knot riding his stomach. That night, the sound came earlier, 1:59, and closer to the north foundation, which meant a path existed. He pressed his ear to the block, ignored the smell of dust and fuel oil, and heard soft breathing between steps. He decided to compare his notes against external clocks, a habit from dispatch that filtered coincidence from signal with patience. He checked transit schedules and found a freight delivery to the antique shop at midnight every other day, closed route. He marked those days with a triangle in the margin, then noticed the footsteps fell hours after the truck departed. On Friday, he asked the food pantry director, a patient woman named Mavis Alcott, age 50, whether someone used the basement. She said the pantry closed at 6 and the keys were tracked. Then she looked worried and asked if something happened. He told her he heard odd noise, nothing dangerous yet, and he would keep her informed before calling the police. He reached out to a friend who knew Boots by tread. a park ranger named Pietro Licari, age 42. Pietro listened to the phone recording and said the spacing suggested a careful adult, not a kid, likely carrying weight. He told Alaric to watch for a scrape on the off foot, a marker of someone testing boards or stones. That night, Alaric brought a cheap wildlife camera from a hardware store, just a unit that logged sound and temperature changes. He set it in the boiler room, not for video since there was nothing to see, but for time-stamped audio. He also sprinkled a narrow ribbon of flour near the expansion joint because footprints sometimes post where eyes cannot. At 2:08, the floor hummed lightly, the air felt cooler near the wall, and the camera clicked after a shift. Later, he played it back and heard a new detail, a small spray like water under pressure, then a hand tap. It sounded like someone touched a pipe and felt for vibration, which made the knot in his stomach tighten. On Saturday afternoon, he visited the public library and asked for old fire insurance maps, the kind surveyors hoarded. The librarian brought a set from 1948 and 1963, which showed a coal room under the choir. A narrow passage ran toward the river, marked as service, with a note stating shared utility with neighboring parcel. The neighboring parcel matched the antique shop, which made sense to old builders who shared trenches and split costs when money was scarce. He copied the sheet and took it to the pastor, who studied the lines, then sighed and rubbed his jaw. The pastor said a previous board closed the passage after a minor flood, then let the city handle whatever remained. Alaric asked permission to open the old choir risers to check for a hatch, and the pastor agreed to supervised access. They pulled 2 sections and found only plywood and dust, which meant the hatch was either gone or moved. Yet along the north sill, a set of nails showed different age, darker and uneven, as if boards were reused. That night, the footsteps ran later, almost 4, and quicker, like someone in a hurry who disliked being underground. He thought about calling the police, but worried he would deliver a false alarm and lose the trust he needed. Instead, he called the non-emergency line and reported suspicious subterranean noise, and the dispatcher logged it with a routine number. On Sunday morning, a congregant named Basil Ortega, age 60, told him he once saw steam venting in the alley. Basil said it happened near a rusted rectangle that looked like an access panel, then he made a helpless shrug. He also said an unfamiliar white van loaded crates behind the antique shop 2 nights earlier, long after the truck left. Alaric used his lunch to walk the alley, where he found a metal cover sunk into cracked asphalt beside an old drain. The cover was not city standard, the screws mismatched, the edges marked by recent scrapes where a bar pried. He took photos from 3 angles and emailed them to the pastor, then placed a tiny pencil mark by a bolt. He returned that night and listened, and when the footsteps began, he watched his phone clock and checked the flour. The new powder held a single faint dent by the joint, not a full print, but enough to show pressure. He leaned closer and smelled faint bleach, which meant someone cared about leaving little behind, a detail that narrowed possibilities. On Monday, he flagged the city water department and asked whether any reports showed pressure fluctuations overnight in that block. A supervisor called back and said there were brief spikes every few nights around 3, like a valve opening and closing. He added that an inspector noted a missing cap on a retired service branch near the river last winter. That call changed the tone, because pressure spikes paired with footsteps turned from mystery to infrastructure problem with risk. He told the pastor he would ask police for a walkthrough, then called the same dispatcher and requested a non-emergency assist. A patrol officer arrived with calm posture and a flashlight, listened to the audio, and agreed to a careful look. They checked the alley cover first and found the pencil mark missing, replaced by a fresh smear of dirt and oil. The officer requested a utility truck, and a crew appeared with a wrench and a portable meter that hummed softly. The crew measured sound through the cover and picked up flow. Not strong, but a whisper moving in pulses like breathing. They paused for a supervisor, who arrived with a locked case that held a camera snake used on drains and conduits. The team fed the lens past the cover and into a rough concrete passage that curved toward the church foundation. The view showed shoe scuffs on the dust, then a brass T-valve patched into an old water line with tape. The supervisor killed the street feed, then pointed at the tape and said someone had no license for that kind of work. He also said a misthreaded cap could vent gas from the adjacent service, which shifted the conversation from curiosity to hazard. The officer requested a second unit to secure the block, and they cleared the alley while keeping voices low. Inside the church, Alaric stood by the boiler room while the utility meter ticked, confirming a slight pressure bleed through the slab. The footsteps started again, softer this time, then stopped when the water cut out, which pinned the pattern with confidence. He radioed the officer, who whispered that someone was still down there, then signaled the team to quiet. A darker shape glided past the camera lens, and a hand reached the valve, then froze when it found no resistance. The hand wore a thin mechanic glove with a tear at the knuckle, a detail that stood out like a flag. The officer announced presence through the cover, voice firm without volume, telling the person to stay still and breathe easy. A minute stretched heavy, then a voice answered, shaky and tired, saying he was stuck because the valve handle jammed. The team opened the cover and escorted out a man in his late 30s, pale, layered in dust and damp. He gave his name as Trenton Vale, age 38, the owner of the antique shop across the street with deliveries. He said he entered the old service passage months ago after a plumber showed a way to run a supplemental water line. He said he needed pressure for cleaning and steaming items, though his meter and bills did not match the usage schedule. He admitted he liked the privacy, then insisted he never touched the gas, which the utility crew would later verify. They checked his shop and found a narrow door behind a rack of film cameras that opened onto the same cracked alley. There were wet footprints on the threshold, hex-patterned soles with a little drag on the right, matching the sound spacing. There was a box of brass fittings, a saw with minimal filings, and a cardboard tray holding mismatched valve caps. At the station, according to the later report, he told them a contractor left the tool and he only learned by watching. He said the passage felt safer at night because the street was empty and he liked the quiet under the church. He also said he heard a bell once through the stone and timed his movements between scheduled campus patrols. The city documented the patched valve, sealed the retired branch, and fined the shop for unauthorized connection and trespass through utility right-of-way. The gas line near the valve showed no tampering, which eased everyone, though the near miss tightened throats along the block. The police shared a copy of the dispatch log, noting the initial call as checked and secured. Ulrich printed the log and glued it into his notebook beside the first pencil scrawl about the 2-beat rhythm. He added a short summary stating that the footsteps tracked to an illegal water tap under the slab, then paused. He wrote that the timing aligned with utility spikes, and the alley cover thread marks confirmed regular access before the shutdown. The pastor thanked him in a staff meeting, with witnesses confirming calm handling and careful records that guided city response. Rhea patted his shoulder and said the flower idea was odd and smart, then promised to mop where he dusted. Mavis delivered coffee and said the pantry would have closed for days if the water had been fouled by sediment. Pietro called and laughed softly, saying the drag heard in the recording matched the right boot scuff found at the door. He said the pattern on the sole looked like an old surplus boot, hex blocks that turned slick on damp concrete. He liked that a simple tape recorder pinned a path better than a dozen guesses and said, "Well done." Weeks later, the utility crew returned and filled the passage with flowable mix, a gray slurry that hardens without voids. They left a small marker in the alley for the map, a stamped square showing the retired line and closure date. Inside the boiler room, the floor stayed quiet. The green light blinked the same, and the chalk line gathered dust. People asked Alaric if he was scared while listening to footsteps underneath, and he always answered with a half smile. He said fear is different from alert, and alert is what he used when tracking trucks through black ice before sunrise. He also said the quiet afterward felt heavier than the noise because silence makes you question whether you imagined everything. He kept the notebook in his locker and reread the first pages when he doubted why small details matter during routine nights. The triangle marks still sat by the delivery days, and the circles still highlighted the times that repeated like a clock. He had added a final entry, stating that listening is a skill, and that meters and maps are companions. Trenton kept the shop open under a suspended operations agreement, limited hours, supervised water, and a written promise about deliveries. He came by once with a receipt and asked the pastor to sign a community service form for repair work around the lot. He paused near the boiler room door and stared at the concrete, then thanked Alaric without meeting his eyes. Alaric nodded and said, "Take care," then wrote a line later that night about how people choose their own pressure. He meant water and he meant life, and the line read corny on the page, so he crossed a word and moved on. He folded the notebook closed, poured fresh coffee, and walked the church perimeter while the river hummed under the bluff. He still listened in places others ignored because careful listening had made a map where drawings ended and footsteps began. He carried the printed utility sketch until the paper softened, then kept the new revised copy with the closure stamp. He filed both in a manila folder labeled basement under the church, just a marker in case memory failed years later. In his mind, the story stayed simple. A man heard footsteps where no hallway should run and wrote the times carefully. The notes pressed outward into witnesses, maps, meters, and one rusted cover that told the truth when a bolt turned. The payoff was not drama, but a good fix, which is better, and the quiet afterward made sense again. The stories. This motel room voicemail raised a separate question. On a rainy Tuesday, near the end of tourist season, a motel room voicemail carried a question that did not belong. It turned a tired end of shift into something careful and strange, and it started with a blinking red light. Dorian Pike worked nights at the Northway Motor Inn, 37, a patient manager who fixed things others ignored. The place sat off a service road past a truck stop, with a diner and a feed store as neighbors. He started that shift with a simple goal: balance the register, finish the towel count, and coax the ice machine back alive. The storm slowed arrivals, and the security monitor rolled its quiet grayscale loop of the parking lot. Housekeeping left a note about room 12, the kind of note other managers forgot to read. The bed looked unused after checkout, the television glowed at low volume, and the phone message light blinked at eye level. He carried a spare key, pushed the door open, and smelled damp carpet and motel soap. Nothing surprising. The news channel murmured through commercials, a static map of counties he could name without trying. On the nightstand sat a spiral notebook half full of block letters, a takeout cup, and a key card with the room number worn. He pressed the voicemail button with his knuckle because the button shocked him once in summer. A male voice filled the room with a flat question that stopped his hand, like a bad chord laid wrong. The voice asked, "Did you move the smoke detector again?" And then silence, followed by the system tone and cutoff. He replayed it twice, and the question felt like a pebble in a shoe, something to be dealt with. Smoke detectors did not get moved by guests without reason, and nothing about the room said routine or careless. Dorian checked the detector on the ceiling, a cheap white unit that did not match the others on the hall. The motel used one supplier for replacements, and this casing lacked their sticker and the penciled date inside. He stood on the chair, unscrewed the ring, and found fresh scuffs around the mounting plate as if removed recently. The unit felt heavier than a sensor should, and the test light never flashed, which meant battery or guts. He set it down on the table, and the vent above the television rattled just a little with the wind. He turned off the television, let the room get quiet, and heard faint tapping through the vent to the next room. The motel had a habit of telling its secrets through noise, and he had learned that language over years. He stepped into the hall and knocked on room 14, where a regular was finishing a long week of field work. Quinn Hauer was 29, a cell tower contractor with a tool bag and a precise way of speaking. Quinn opened the door and said, "Heard the tapping, thought it was heat, but it kept hitching, like somebody counting seconds." Dorian nodded, thanked him, and walked back to room 12 with the detector in his hands and a growing list. He checked the guest ledger for that room, found the name Shane Bennett written in rough ballpoint yesterday afternoon. The rate was paid in cash with a $20 deposit, and there was a note about requesting a high floor. The motel only had 2 floors, which made the request sound like reflex, not preference, and it bothered him. He logged into the creaking PBX console behind the office door, a beige box that stored more than it admitted. The system kept message times, not caller numbers, but it stored archived call counts and extension traces within limits. The voice message timestamp put the call at 4:21 this morning when he had been home asleep. The system marked it as external to the motel, but without a number, which meant blocked or masked through a service. He played the message once more through the PBX speaker, and this time he listened past the words to the air. There was a faint horn in the background, not a car, something long and low that cut through the compressor hum. The town had 2 train crossings, one near the elevator factory, the other near the river access by Mill Road. The factory horn sounded higher by habit, and the river crossing had a long, lonely tone that travelers remembered. He wrote train horn in the notebook, then dialed the non-emergency line and described a suspicious device in room 12. He kept the language careful and factual, and the dispatcher asked for his name, then said a unit would respond. Housekeeper Irina Kowalski stopped by the desk to clock out. 58. Quiet. A 10-year veteran of the place. She saw the detector on the counter and said she smelled glue when she changed linens, thought it came from that. He asked if she saw anyone in room 12 after checkout, and she said only a woman with a baseball cap. She had a service bucket and a ring of keys, and Irina thought she was with maintenance since she walked like staff. There were 2 maintenance guys by payroll. Neither wore caps, and neither worked Tuesdays after 3 in the afternoon. He wrote this down, then checked a clipboard of deliveries and found a package signed by someone not on schedule. The box came yesterday morning for guest Bennett, signed by a scrawl that did not match any front desk initials. It contained a replacement smoke detector per the note, which made the blinking voicemail question feel heavier. Dorian carried the box to the office, found bubble wrap inside, plus a cutout where the detector had Saturday, tape residue stuck in a neat circle on the cardboard, and a tiny zip bag with nothing in it fell from a seam. He looked at the detector again under the desk lamp and noticed a slot behind the grill where no slot should be. He slid a paperclip in and clicked against something spring-loaded, which offered and then refused to move. The responding officer arrived while the storm thickened, and his boots left dark prints that dried like islands. He introduced himself as Deputy Holloway, 40, calm voice, and asked for the room key, the voicemail, and the timeline. Dorian played the message for him on the office speaker, and the train horn showed itself again under the words. Holloway wrote it down, then called in the serial from the detector, and the brand came back to a discount dropshipper. They walked to room 12 with the box, and Holloway took photos with a little camera that hated the low light. He gave Dorian latex gloves from his pocket, then pointed at the slot and said he would rather not break it. Dorian tried the paperclip again, this time with a little twist and a push, and the plate popped forward an inch. Inside sat something that was not a sensor, a puck with a lens barely visible and a microcard at the edge. He did not pull it, he did not touch the lens, he just looked at Holloway, whose jaw tightened for 3 beats. The deputy called dispatch and asked for a detective on call, then told Dorian to step back and breathe. The motel office had a rule about honesty with guests, which worked until honesty touched evidence and risk. Dorian printed a sign for the counter that said service delay for weather, and the storm covered that small necessary lie. Holloway kept the room closed and waited for the detective, while Dorian returned to the PBX to audit messages. He printed the log for the last 2 days, circled 3 external calls to room 12, all between midnight and 5. He played the first 2 messages carefully, and they were empty hang-ups, with the same horn underneath and 1 faint laugh. He resisted all guessing and wrote horn consistent in a margin, then underlined the time of the 3rd message. He checked the security drive for the hallway, and the camera caught only the tops of heads and a bit of shoulder. At 3:12 this morning, a person in a cap walked by with a tote, turned left, and vanished from frame. Dorian paused on the frame and noted the sleeve stripes, a set of 2 pale bands near the wrist. Irina had seen a cap on the woman, and the frame showed hair tucked tight, with a loose strand at the neck. Detective Renner arrived with a kit and a steady patience, a mid-40s investigator who disliked motel carpet. She listened to the voicemail twice, glanced at the detector, and asked Dorian to walk her through intake and checkout. He explained the cash payment, the request for a high floor, and the delivery for a detector that should not change. She wrote as he talked, asked about prior incidents, and he mentioned 2 privacy complaints from summer travelers. Those complaints stopped after he replaced room units from the same run, and he had kept the receipts and dates. He pulled copies from the accordion file, and she photographed them, then asked whether any rooms shared vent passageways. He described the vent layout, straight shaft between rooms in pairs, with thin walls that carried sound farther than comfort. Renner nodded and walked to room 14, asked Quinn to step into the hall, and confirmed the tapping report. Quinn described the pace like a metronome, not random, 2 taps, then a short pause, repeated until the thunder started. Renner wrote it down, and Dorian drew the pattern in a margin, then realized something he had missed earlier today. The television in room 12 was on the news channel at low volume, which travelers often used as a decoy. Some people left it on to pretend someone was inside, which meant the room might have been staged after a quick exit. Renner opened the detector with gloves and eased the card into a tiny envelope, then sealed it with her initials. She asked Dorian about any computers to view file sizes, not contents, just metadata, and he shook his head no. She used her agency laptop to check what the card held, and the screen reflected in the blank television glass. The card contained multiple files named by date and time, a standard naming scheme, which meant scheduled recording, not motion. Renner closed the laptop without opening anything and said the specifics would wait for a warrant and a lab. She asked for the guest profile again, and he gave the same summary, plus the note about the signed delivery receipt. Dorian returned to the box and saw a faint watermark in the cardboard that read Consolidated Freight with a Town. The town sat by the river tracks where the Longhorn lived, and the company ran a warehouse near the ramp. He wrote the company down as an external lead, then called the number printed on their listing from a web search. He asked, in his perfectly polite desk voice, whether any packages left for a motel guest yesterday morning. The dispatcher said they handed one small box to a contractor with a name that matched no employee on file. It was recorded on their log with a time, and the signature block contained the same scrawl as his earlier photocopy. Renner thanked him for the call, took the information, and said she would handle any next contact with that company. She requested the spiral notebook from the room, and Dorian placed it in a bag, pages open to the block letters. The letters contained hotel names and highway exits, a list of routes that matched a traveler who did not like surprises. Some lines included cable channel numbers, others included lamplight wattages, and one included the word ceiling with a star. Dorian remembered a complaint from 2 weeks ago from a different guest about a beeping detector in room 5. He checked his maintenance log and found he replaced that unit on a Wednesday after a short argument about deposit charges. He fetched the old detector from the storage shelf, where broken things went to wait for disposal, and compared its weight. The broken one felt light as expected, and the one from room 12 felt like two of them taped together. He unscrewed the broken one and found no strange slot, only dust, a dead battery, and the usual brittle plastic. Renner watched from the doorway and nodded, then answered her phone, and her yes sounded like cautious confirmation. The non-emergency dispatcher had pulled 2 archived calls from the spring that sounded similar, not identical, but close. Each referenced a detector, each asked whether it had been moved, and both targeted rooms paid in cash and late. Renner asked Dorian to print any copies of photo identification kept on file, and he showed the log policy instead. The inn did not photocopy identification unless the card used for payment had a name mismatch or a mismatch with booking. He looked at the lobby camera track for the check-in, and the frame showed a jacket with sleeve stripes again. The face never lifted to the lens, and the cap brim hid most features, but the build matched the hallway pass. The storm eased into a steady pour, the kind that makes a street look polished, and the motel sign clicked. Renner gave Dorian a statement form and asked him to write what he did and why, as precisely as possible. He wrote that a voicemail raised a secret question about a smoke detector, which is not a thing guests ask. He wrote that the detector was wrong for the room, that its weight felt off, and that a slot existed. He wrote that a horn in the background suggested a location near the river tracks and that a freight watermark helped. He wrote that a woman with a cap carried a tote down the hall, and that tapping came through the vent. Renner finished securing the room and returned the hallway to regular use, with a note to keep room 12 closed. She told Dorian that similar devices had surfaced in short-term rentals nearby, and that his details tightened the pattern. She thanked Irena and Quinn for their help, then left with Holloway and the sealed card and the odd detector. Dorian stood in the quiet office and watched the parking lot glow under a light that had survived 4 storms this month. He made copies of everything for the file, then sat with the register and finished what he started hours earlier. The ice machine hummed to life with a stubborn cough, which felt like a small mercy after the nervous work. 2 days later, Renner called to say the voicemail mattered more than he realized because of the horn and the freight. The freight record placed a contractor truck at the warehouse near the river during the call window before dawn. She said the case would likely spread across jurisdictions and that his notes already sat in a shared folder. She did not share more, and he did not ask, because he understood the slow way these things must move to hold. Quinn checked out with a handshake and a tight thanks, and Irina started a new hallway routine that included ceiling checks. The motel added a policy line about devices, not because it fixed the world, but because it set a tone. On the next Tuesday, the phone light blinked again in a different room, and Dorian felt a breath catch. He pressed the button and heard a normal message from a family asking for extra towels, and he laughed because relief deserves sound. He still thought about the spiral notebook, about the starred word ceiling, and about the staged television glow. He thought about the simple question that did not belong, and how such questions sometimes open doors no one planned. Travelers came and went, the storm season thinned, and the parking lot felt like a stage that forgot its lines. Dorian kept the office tidy and the camera lenses clean, and he learned to trust the hairs rising on his arm. The stories. Ranger Station Ledger flagged a missing permit at dawn. At first light, the Ranger Station Ledger spat out an alert that one backcountry permit number did not reconcile with issued copies. The overnight dispatcher circled the entry in red marker and wrote missing, which was the only word nobody wanted to see. Latham Reyes was 39 and worked as a field ranger who managed trailheads, radios, and the old metal key cabinet. He clocked in early, poured coffee into a chipped mug, then read the ledger twice and felt the room shrink. The permit number matched a reservation tied to a solo hiker who had not checked out by yesterday's sunset. The name read Tomas Halper, age 37, and the emergency contact line ended with no answer recorded. The station had a routine for this exact situation, which looked simple on paper and complicated in real life. He pulled the overnight radio log and the reservation printouts, then called the county dispatch desk for archived calls. The dispatcher on duty answered with a clipped voice and confirmed one brief call near dusk from a nearby pullout. The call dropped before the location pinged twice, so they logged it as incomplete. The park sat in a mountain chain that people photographed from a highway turnout that smelled like hot breaks in summer. Locals said the place had thin borders where trails overlapped with old timber tracks and forgotten mining access roads. Latham set a simple goal for the day, which was to verify whether Tomas walked out early and skipped the desk. Some hikers did that, and he hated how often it fooled staff into sounding alarms. He decided to check cameras at the east exit and the service road past the old quarry first. He taped the ledger alert to his clipboard, added radio times from the night log, then headed for the truck with a paper map. A gray Subaru with mud caked behind the plates sat in the day lot under a fading trailhead sign. The plate number matched the permit file, so the vehicle check became the trigger that changed the plan entirely. His voice on the radio stayed steady, but he felt that familiar pressure behind the eyes that always came with missing cars. The last ranger who ignored a parked car overnight still had nightmares about the aftermath that followed. Latham walked a slow circle around the Subaru and took photos of the interior through the windows. He counted a blue windbreaker, a gas station coffee cup, a folded receipt, and an orange wrapper with the corner torn off. He logged the items in his notes and called the plate to the county line to confirm registration. The response came back clean, with a mailing address to a city 2 hours away and no active warrants. Two backpackers in their late 20s shuffled by and looked at the Subaru like it might answer a question. The woman spoke first and said they passed a guy at the junction near the ridge after a late climb. She described a man with a close beard, a faded cap, and a limp that looked like a boot rubbing wrong. She added that he asked about the shortcut to the lake, which did not exist, then waved and kept moving. The guy with her nodded, then said the man had a new pack that made his shoulders ride up like he was not used to it. Witness statements always came salted with memory gaps, yet both details felt real in a way that mattered. Latham thanked them, wrote their names and numbers, then reminded them to check out at the station before they left town. He pulled the dash cam card from the station truck used on the evening loop and plugged it into the office laptop. The last loop showed nothing on the service road, then a fragment of taillights near the quarry gate at gray dusk. The timestamp matched the brief call window from dispatch, which made his coffee taste like metal. He froze the frame where the taillights blinked and magnified the shot until the pixels bled and swam. The shape of the car looked like a small pickup with a roof rack, which did not match the Subaru in the lot. He saved the frame, printed it, and stapled it to the ledger alert for a later look. He called the quarry foreman on the number posted by the locked gate, then asked whether any crews ran equipment after hours. The foreman swore nothing moved, then said the gate lock had a stiff shackle that hated winter, which did not help much. A call came in from the store in the valley, where hikers bought dehydrated chili and overpriced fuel canisters in bright colors. The clerk said she recognized the name from the morning before and remembered that he used a prepaid card with a scratched strip. She mentioned he bought a paper map and a plastic whistle, then asked if everything was all right, which Latham did not answer directly. He requested the receipt copy and any camera footage that covered the register and door. The clerk said the owner saved footage for 2 weeks as a shoplifting deterrent, so she would print stills from around 9:15. The mention of a prepaid card added a wrinkle that he did not like, because it cut down searchable paper trails by a lot. He wrote it down anyway, then underlined it twice and moved on. He drove to the ridge trailhead and checked the kiosk log where people still wrote their plans with dull pencils. The entry for Tomas said out on Saturday, back by Sunday, route Circle Lake counterclockwise, Camp Night 1 near Inlet. The loop around the lake had 4 clear stream crossings and 2 spots where cairns tempted new hikers into old fire scars. He looked for additional notes and found a faint scrawl that read, "Saw tent near logjam after dark," which lacked a dateline. He took a photo, then turned to the ridge where the wind pushed low clouds across a face that liked to break ankles. He walked the first mile with his radio on scan and found fresh boot prints that veered onto the quarry track despite a closed sign. The prints were deep on the outer heel, which matched the reported limp, and the spacing suggested someone who favored the right leg. The quarry track dropped behind fir trees and came out near a rusted gate with a battered lock that still hung closed. A torn strip of fabric in a dull blue shade clung to a stump where a person might squeeze past the hinge. He bagged the strip, wrote the time, then looked up to see crows cross low and fast like bad messengers. He followed the track to a flat where water pooled in old ruts and reflected a sky that never looked friendly in March. A mound of gravel showed fresh tire marks with an odd zigzag that looked like someone learning a clutch by feel. He crouched and ran a finger along the rut wall and felt dust that had not settled into crust, which put the timing close. The quarry foreman had denied any late activity, so the marks likely tied to whoever drove near the gate at dusk. He shot photos, measured the width with a broken stick and a tape, then plotted the line on his map. Back at the station, he spread the notes, photos, and the printed taillights frame across a desk that had a gouge shaped like Idaho. He listened to the archive dispatch call again, which captured a short, breathy voice, saying quick words that fractured with static. The caller had said something that sounded like lost permit or lost person, then a muffled clack, and the line fell quiet. He played the clip 5 times and wrote down 2 interpretations with a question mark, which was the style the supervisor liked. The radio log from hikers listed a second-hand report from a fisherman who heard a whistle near the inlet after dusk. The fisherman had used a cheap handheld radio with a weak battery, so the recording lived as a line of text and not a voice. That was fine, because the whistle purchase from the Valley store had already planted itself in his mind as a breadcrumb. Late morning brought a small-town police officer named Mara Key, who handled the highway stretch that touched the park border. She was 33 and worked patrol shifts that crossed into everything that did not fit elsewhere. She parked by the Subaru and walked up with a notepad and a friendly face that could turn sharp in a second. They stood by the hood and traded notes that barely needed full sentences after years of joint calls. She said the highway turnout camera caught a gray pickup with a roof rack at 1842, heading toward the quarry. She added that a volunteer firefighter reported an unusual truck bed loaded with tarps after 9 near the county line. Latham held up the taillight's print and said the shape tracked with what she had. She nodded, then asked whether the missing permit might actually be a duplicate number from a previous season. He blinked once, then went very quiet because that question hit a different nerve. Permit numbers rolled over every winter long before the system went digital, and some older blocks had gaps and repeats. The ledger printed the flag because the manual book showed the number as issued to a different name in late fall. He dug into the archive cabinet that breathed dust and pine and pulled the worn book from the shelf, marked 98. The ink on the page showed the same number assigned to a group from a climbing club from a city 3 hours west. The lead name read Rayan Cade, age 32, and a phone number that matched a defunct area code now recycled. He compared the handwriting from both permit slips and saw the same loop on the number 4 in the dateline. That did not make sense until he looked at the clerk's signature, which matched a retired staffer who kept garage sales every summer. He wrote down the name and the year in words so the report would not kick back for formatting later. He stepped outside and called the retired clerk on a personal number found in an old staff tree near the copier. The woman sounded bright and happy to hear a ranger voice, then quieted when he explained the duplicate number issue. She said she used to pre-write permits during busy seasons to speed lines, then fill names in with a light touch. She added that some pads got stored in a desk drawer after winter changeover and might have ended up in the surplus box. That surplus box sometimes went to the annual trailer sale with old radios and busted snowshoes for pocket change. He felt his throat go dry and asked whether any blank slips could be floating in the world with the seal already stamped. She said it was possible, then apologized and said nobody had asked about that practice since 1998 ended. He thanked her gently and wrote a note for the supervisor that would not make anyone cheerful. The store clerk sent stills that showed Tomas at the counter holding a paper map in a stiff hand with a white bandage. The timestamp read 9/12, which lined up with when the trailhead sign-in sheet filled up. A second still showed a man behind him wearing a quarry company cap who bought batteries and jerky. That detail landed like a small stone in a bigger pond because of the quarry track prints and the taillights frame. Latham called the quarry foreman again and asked to see the shift roster for the past 2 days. The foreman sighed and said he would email a screenshot since office rules required written requests for full copies. The screenshot arrived with smudged names and a note about 2 contractors hired short-term for cleanup after heavy rain. One contractor matched the cap logo from the still, which felt like a door creaking open after a stubborn winter. Latham and Officer Key drove to the quarry safety office, which smelled like coffee and oil and a fight nobody wanted. The foreman met them with a clipboard and a face that said he hated unexpected questions on a weekday. Key kept her voice friendly and asked to speak with the contractor who wore the cap with the same faded stitch. The foreman said the man was named Vicente Rowe, age 36, who lived in a rented room above the tire shop. He added that Rowe had left early the previous night because a radiator hose blew near the county line. Key asked to see the truck, and the foreman pointed to a gray pickup with a rack and tarps bunched in back. The bed still held a coil of new rope, a rusted shovel, and a muddy cooler that smelled like lake water and gasoline. Latham felt that metallic taste again, which was never a sign of a good afternoon ahead. Rowe arrived from the far lot with hands raised and a look that said he already knew why they were here. He said he had filed a work order for the hose, which they confirmed with a carbon sheet and a phone photo. Key asked whether he had been near the lake after dark, and he said he left the quarry road to test the hose under load. He added that he pulled aside at the turnout near the inlet and heard a whistle that made him wonder about a prank. He did not call anyone because his phone was dead after streaming music during cleanup, which landed badly but not impossibly. He said he saw a small tent by the log jam and a lantern glow. Then a figure waved and yelled something about a permit. Key wrote it down and asked for permission to look inside the cooler, which Rowe granted with a shrug and a steady jaw. Inside lay 2 empty water jugs, a crumpled fuel canister sleeve, and a plastic whistle in an unopened bag from the Valley store. Back at the station, Latham laid the whistle sleeve next to the store receipt copy and saw a mismatch in barcode digits. The sleeve in the cooler matched an older shipment code that the store had sold out months ago during a discount run. That meant the whistle in the cooler likely came from a different source than the one Tomas bought at 9/12. He looked again at the still where Tomas held the map with the bandaged hand and noticed a line of dried mud on the cuff. The mud looked pale and powdery, which matched the quarry fill used to stabilize the service road after storms. He wrote a timeline that pinned Tomas at the store, then likely at the quarry road, and finally near the inlet after dusk. He wrote a parallel line for Rowe that put him at the quarry, then on the same road, then near the inlet while testing a repair. The lines felt too neat until he added the duplicate permit issue that now seemed like a hinge rather than a footnote. He dug into the city address on file for Tomas and found a rental building with mailboxes that had newer locks installed last winter. The property manager answered with the cheerful speed of someone who wanted a clean day and already knew it was lost. She said a man with that name had paid cash, kept to himself, and left 2 weeks early with no forwarding note. She also said a different name had appeared on a delivery label once, which the courier mentioned when buzzing the wrong unit. The alternate name sounded familiar, and it clicked only when he reopened the 1998 ledger page. It matched the lead from the old climbing club permit, which tied the duplicate number to a person who should have aged out by now. The detail did not mean they were the same person, but it did mean someone liked to reuse names tied to old paper. Officer Key ran the alternate name through an old case index that kept records of search and rescue incidents on paper and microfilm. A report from 2 winters back described a fake distress call at the same inlet that lured volunteers into a risky night crossing. The caller used a prepaid phone and a different name, yet the voice transcription carried similar clipped phrasing and rushed breaths. The motive at the time seemed like a cruel prank, and nobody had linked it to anything tangible after the snow melted. Latham rechecked the gap between the whistle report and the dropped call and found a sliver where a person could move a short distance. He called the firefighter, who reported the unusual truck bed, and asked whether the tarps had looked wet or pulled tight. The firefighter said the tarps were tied tidy and dry, then added that the driver waved like a man who wanted to be seen. Afternoon shadows drew long, so they hiked to the inlet with a drone from the county that tracked heat signatures. The drone skimmed treetops and sent back images of the logjam, the bank, and the flat near the old survey marker. No body, no fresh campsite, just flattened grass near the logjam where a tent might have stood during a short decoy. They found 2 sets of prints, one deep on the right heel and one narrower with an even stride that cut toward the quarry track. Near the waterline, he found a paper map folded in a way he recognized from the still, which made his chest go tight. The map held a smear of pale mud and a faint X near the old prospector's trail that dead-ended at a slide. He bagged the map and stared at the X until it felt like it stared back, then marked the spot on his own copy. The slide path opened into a shallow cut with wooden forms left from a never-finished footbridge project funded in 2005. He followed the forms until he reached a square of ground tamped hard as a table near a tree with a scar. The earth felt too tidy for random hikers, and the tree scar had fresh resin that caught light in a clean yellow bead. He brushed aside pine duff and found a buried plastic box that held a stack of old permit slips with the seal already stamped. The slips matched the retired clerk's pre-written style, and several had Rayan Cade typed in a cheap courier font. A second stack carried blank lines and a stamp pad spot like a kit for people who wanted official-looking paper for a plan. He felt a chill that did not come from wind, then called Key over and photographed the box from 3 angles. The twist revealed itself slowly, as if embarrassed to be simple after such a day of layered rumors and tire marks. Someone had staged a missing hiker using a duplicated permit number and a prepaid trail of receipts to trigger a standard response. The purpose was not to vanish, but to bait a small law enforcement swarm toward the lake while a second person moved cargo from the quarry. The zigzag tire marks in the gravel now read like a practice route for a heavy load that needed a quiet window. The fisherman's whistle and the tent glow created a cautious pause in anyone tempted to check the inlet on foot. The taillights near dusk were a partner vehicle that pulled close to the logjam, then backed out during the start of the false search. The target was not a person, but scrap copper and tools stored in a locked shed near the service road past the old quarry. They found the shed lock sliced clean with a battery saw when they returned with the foreman and a bolt cutter key. The inventory list taped inside showed spools of copper wire and fuel additives that had resale value in cash-only salvage yards. The contractor truck bed dimensions matched the load footprint on the dusty floor, and a partial shoe print matched the even stride near the inlet. The limp prints belonged to whoever wore a new boot wrong, which now felt like another layer for misdirection rather than a true injury. When confronted, Rowe did not fold. But the quiet employee who ran the tire shop room rentals gave a statement. He said Rowe met a man who matched Tomas in the parking lot and moved tarps between vehicles near sunset. He added that Rowe left after 9 with the bed loaded to the rails, which aligned with the firefighter observation with uncomfortable precision. The county prosecutor would need clean evidence, so they worked careful and slow to gather the chain. The paper box of pre-written permits became a centerpiece since it explained how the ledger flag could be predicted in advance. The duplicate number drew attention at dawn by design, which pulled eyes away from the road where cargo rolled past a gate. The prepaid receipt at the Valley store placed a decoy at a predictable time, which witnesses could later repeat with conviction. The dropped call created a sympathetic recording in the archive that every incident review would elevate in urgency. The taillights in the dash cam and the turnout camera filled the gaps with enough glow to animate a story that felt real. None of it solved every moment, yet together it built a scaffold sturdy enough for charges that did not fall apart. They never found a body by the inlet, which fit the theory that nobody had been in true danger that night. A week later, a different store camera captured Tomas in a neighboring county buying a tire patch kit with a clean, unbandaged hand. The clip went into the case file under reportedly cited, along with a printout of the copper sales ledger from a salvage yard off the highway. Rowe took a short plea on theft and tampering with evidence, which irritated people who liked long answers. The paperwork on the duplicate permits triggered a policy change that barred pre-writing anything since 2021 onward. The retired clerk cried in the parking lot when she learned her old shortcuts had fed a scam, then hugged Latham like a nephew. He told her people adapt to pressures they do not design, and the fix mattered more than the blame. When the Subaru finally left the lot on a tow, the trailhead looked as ordinary as a grocery aisle on a Tuesday. Officer Key stood with her hands in her jacket and watched the tow lights climb the hill toward the highway. She said the simplest cons always hide in systems that run on habit and paperwork. Then she smiled without much humor. Latham looked at the ridge where the wind never ran out, then at the ledger that still sat on the desk. He thought about the whistle and the map and the soft faith people place in official stamps and good intentions. Later, he locked the station, and the rafters creaked in the cool like an old house learning a new rule. He drove past the turnout and looked once at the lake, which held its secrets with the stubborn patience of cold water and granite. He told himself they had not solved every detail, but they had nudged the pattern toward daylight, which was enough for now. The stories. Why this abandoned cabin had alleged proof in drywall. The story kept circling a single point about an empty cabin and a word written behind drywall. People called it proof. They did not agree on what it proved, but they repeated the word until it sounded heavy. Renata Vale was 36 and worked as a county property assessor who handled delinquent parcels. She drove a faded sedan, kept a folder of index cards, and listened to dispatch traffic. On a late spring morning, she headed to a decommissioned fishing road where a tax sale cabin sat empty. Her goal was simple and boring, which was to document storm damage before the auction and verify the interior. The cabin stood near a shallow creek with boards turned gray and a porch sag bent toward the dirt. A rusted mailbox leaned near the gate, with paint scabbed off and a number grit filmed over. Renata took photos for the file. Then she checked the back door where a hasp hung, but the lock was missing. She logged the broken hardware as prior damage, then stepped inside while the floor pressed its complaint. The incident began as a sound that did not fit the room, and then a sight. A sheet of drywall in the front room had a patch that sounded hollow when tapped. The panel was bright white against tobacco walls, and 4 black screws sat too straight and clean. She noted a faint dust halo around the joint compound, which looked newer than the rest by many years. She started a routine sweep while recording voice notes to keep the chain of events tidy. The stove held a nest of brittle twigs, the fridge was gone, and a thin mattress lay folded. Renata kept moving and counted outlets, then paused at the patched panel again. Her notes said the sheet brand looked like a type common after 2010, not the 1980s era expected here. 2 neighbors drifted by while she worked and gave versions that agreed on mood, not detail. A ranch hand named Cleo Vargas recalled sirens and smoke from 1998 when a fire line whipped through. Cleo said a man who stayed here left in a hurry and never came back, and people held a fundraiser that winter. A grocer named Benito Lake remembered men in a county truck replacing a little window about 2012, though he admitted the year could be off. Renata took their names, then asked if anyone else checked the cabin in recent years. Cleo said an insurance adjuster came by after a windstorm, and Cleo believed the woman filed a report and sealed the door. Benito said a teenager broke in 2 summers later, then a deputy taped a notice and told kids to stay away. Renata wrote both recollections as witness statements with the usual caveats about memory. She returned to the panel and looked for a reason a patch would be that clean inside this neglected shell. The screws were square drive, which was common for newer fasteners, and the spacing suggested a single small repair. The joint compound had been sanded poorly and left a telltale crescent above the seam. She ran a small flashlight along the edge and found a hair-thin line that was not paint. Her job did not include prying open walls without cause, so she called her supervisor and explained the condition. He told her to capture more context and check permits, then hold off on any invasive step until the records search. Renata agreed and left the cabin to sit with her laptop in the car while the creek talked its small talk. The county database was a stubborn thing that offered results if you knew how to ask without being greedy. She entered the parcel number and found a series of tax liens followed by a default. The permit history showed 2 entries worth attention. First, a window replacement request filed 2011, then a drywall materials purchase noted by a grant program 2015. The second entry surprised her, since the grant was designed for weatherization, not interior repairs. She cross-checked the vendor list and saw a receipt from a hardware store 3 towns away. The purchase line item said half-sheet gypsum and screws, with a date in early summer 2015. A note mentioned a volunteer crew and a case number from the sheriff office. Renata paused and rechecked the address to make sure she was not mixing properties. She downloaded everything, then called the sheriff records clerk and asked if the case number could be viewed. The clerk said the report was open public information because it involved property maintenance hours completed after a welfare check. The description said a deputy supervised a group that boarded a back window and patched a hole where a wood stove pipe had been. The deputy name was listed as J. Kravitz, with a badge number and a contact line. Renata called the number and reached a retired deputy, who answered his phone with a dry voice and correct dates. He remembered standing in that cabin while a volunteer placed a sheet over a hole, and he remembered the neighbors bringing lemonade. He also remembered boys laughing because someone had drawn a cartoon in dust above the refrigerator space. Renata thanked him and asked if any record included interior photos from that day that could be released. Kravitz said he took 3, which he felt comfortable sharing if the clerk confirmed the release path. The email reached her 10 minutes later, with 3 small images showing a 2-clean patch, a bent stovepipe, and a blank wall. The timestamp read 2015, with an hour that matched late afternoon shadows. Renata zoomed in and saw the same screw pattern she had just seen in person. She returned inside with a copy of the email printed, which satisfied her need for a pre-image before touching anything. She recorded a video on her county phone, then gently ran a utility blade along the painted seam and loosened the small patch. The square drive screws turned with almost no resistance and dropped into her pocket. The board came free and showed the backside marked with pencil lines. There were 2 words in block print near the center, and a string of numbers that looked like miles or hours or both. The words read, "Tell Mara," then below them a date in words that matched late summer 2015. A thin arrow pointed toward the upper corner, where someone had tucked a sealed plastic bag with a micro SD card. Renata did not touch the bag, since she already had more than enough cause to stop and phone this in. She stepped back and spoke to her phone, as if it were a witness who needed comfort rather than patience. She said she had an evidentiary find, likely tied to a case report from 2015, and she described the board condition. She then called her supervisor and said she would hold position and request a deputy to document chain of custody. Her voice felt steady, which helped, and the creek still talked. The responding deputy arrived from the nearest substation and followed a familiar script at a deliberate pace. He photographed the panel, bagged the micro SD card, then requested a second unit to confirm signatures. He also asked Renata to repeat her steps for his body camera, which she did, and her voice stayed calm. He wrote "Tell Mara" in his notebook and underlined the date, then asked about any person by that name in the area. Cleo returned when he saw the cruiser and stood at the fence with a careful expression that suggested curiosity and worry. He said a woman named Mara used to work at the gas station near the highway, and she moved inland after the big fire. He believed she dated the man who once stayed at this cabin, whose name people rarely said anymore. Cleo said the man had a brother who fought with him over debt, which was rumor, and old rumor at that. Renata kept the witness statement straight and did not chase speculation, because theory makes friendly noise but muddies facts. The deputy asked dispatch to check archived calls around late summer 2015 for any mention of the station or the creek. Dispatch later replied that an incomplete emergency call pinged a tower near the old highway with a man's voice saying "wrong truck" before the line died. The call was never connected again, and the dispatch note listed a response that found nothing conclusive on the road. The investigators gathered all of this and began to lay a clean map of what the drywall might mean. The board was patched during a small volunteer day led by Deputy Kravitz, who remembered no note then because the drywall face was clean. The writing was on the backside, so whoever wrote "Tell Mara" likely wrote before installation or wrote during installation and then faced the board inward. The micro SD card fit the same logic, since it had to be tucked away before final screws. The sheriff tech opened the bag carefully and previewed the card on a laptop while Renata stood near the doorway. The card held a few small files and one audio clip that was less than a minute long, with a man breathing hard. A voice said "Mara." Then there was a scrape sound. Then the voice said, "Wrong truck? Check mile marker 12. Then silence. The text said the file metadata matched a late summer date, 2015, which matched the pencil note. The deputy asked Benito about mile 12, and Benito said a vanished reflector stood near a turnout everyone used for tire chains. He said the place was not on maps, but everyone knew it by a crooked pine and a faded mile stencil. A second unit drove there and found an old-cut bank with broken bottles and a rusted number plate choked by vines. That team then called for a grid walk and a metal sweep, which turned up a torn piece of a license frame. County records later produced an abandoned truck report filed by a salvage yard in early fall 2015. The report said a pickup had been moved by a private tow from a turnout before a storm and later sold for parts. The tow ticket listed a different mile marker by mistake, likely copied wrong by the driver, and the ticket names were hard to read. The salvage manager admitted their clerk sometimes took shortcuts with paperwork when storms crowded the yard. A detective interviewed the retired tow driver and asked for his memory of the pickup and its condition after the call. The driver said he remembered an empty truck with a broken rear glass and a tarp inside that smelled like gasoline. He said two men met him at the turnout and pointed to a path, and he signed a work order that he no longer had. He said he remembered a gold wedding band on a chain near the shifter, which he placed in a cup holder out of caution. The audio clip and the drywall note nudged the case from rumor to a timeline that had context and checkable waypoints. The incomplete call in 2015 used the words "wrong truck," which matched the audio and echoed through dispatch records. The mild repair day in 2015 created a perfect stage for a message that only a future visitor might find. The instruction "Tell Mara" suggested the writer knew a specific person would eventually hear about the cabin again. Renata learned that temp crews sometimes used whatever board they had in the truck, which could explain the face-inward mistake. A volunteer might have grabbed a sheet with a pencil note from the stack without thinking, then installed it with the note hidden. Another possibility was that the writer meant to hide the message, assuming a person who cared would eventually come prying. Both options fit the facts, and neither required creative leaps that could not be defended in a report. A second pass through the micro SD card revealed a photo of a dashboard with a gas station logo seen through the windshield. The date stamp matched the summer of 2015, and the triangle logo was the old brand used before a sale. Benito confirmed that the station repainted their canopy that autumn, which inadvertently confirmed the window of time. The detail felt small and almost petty, yet it anchored the sequence to a real week. The detective contacted the station owner, who produced archived night logs, showing a purchase by a prepaid card at 11:42. A print from the receipt showed a pack of ice and a cheap burner phone that matched the model seen in the photo. The clerk on duty had long since moved, though a manager remembered a man who returned twice that night to borrow tape. He said he thought the man looked scraped up, and he remembered a truck with a blue fender and a white tailgate. A family member of the man who stayed at the cabin identified the voice on the audio as a high likelihood match. They provided an older voicemail that had similar breathing patterns when the man climbed hills for fun on weekends. The sheriff's office sent both clips to a regional lab, which returned a cautious report that said the two voices were likely related. The lab kept the language safe, which made sense, because certainty in audio work is often impossible. The drywall word itself caused arguments in corners where the story traveled faster than any memo could hope to move. People liked the part where the house was silent for years while a small message waited for a careful hand. Some said the word proof made sense because the voice was clearly him, and because the date matched the summer when he vanished. Others said proof is for courtrooms and journals, and this was only a lead until tested. Renata held her own view, which was that houses keep small time capsules without meaning to, and sometimes that matters. She had seen children's names carved into baseboards under carpet and grocery lists folded under a sink. She had also seen unsafe wiring stuffed into a cereal box and tucked inside a wall, and the box told its own story. People leave messages wherever they can, hoping someone decent will listen someday when it counts. The case shifted again when a trail crew found a piece of a phone shell near mile marker 11 during a separate survey. The shell matched the burner model bought that night, and nearby crews found a patch of old stain on the soil. A lab swab reported that the residue was fuel, which was consistent with the tow driver memory of gasoline smell in the truck. A chain of steps formed that linked the turnout, the audio clip, and the tow yard path. Mara was located by a social worker who knew 3 different last names for her from utility records. She met with investigators in a room that smelled like coffee, that had been reheated many times and left to think. She said she had not heard from him since that summer, and she cried in a way that was lightless but dry. When told about the drywall note, she put her head down and whispered that he tried to fix things and always left notes. She agreed to listen to the clip, then nodded and said the words were his when he felt cornered by debt and fear. She said wrong truck made sense because his brother drove a similar model and people mixed them up when angry. She said mile 12 meant the turnout where they used to watch road crews because he loved slow machines more than sleep. She asked if the word proof meant she could stop imagining him as a ghost in every passing pickup. The detective did not promise anything, which was the right call, and said the message mattered more than rumor. Mara said that was good enough for now and asked if she could visit the cabin to see the panel with her own eyes. Renata met her there with Cleo and Benito nearby, and they all stood quiet while the creek kept talking. Mara touched the pencil words like a fingertip prayer, then laughed once, small and sudden, because the handwriting was his. The county eventually sold the parcel to a quiet bidder who planned to reclaim lumber and leave the footprint for a garden. Before the sale, the sheriff's office returned the panel to the property with a sealed sleeve that covered the message. A small plaque nailed to a beam recorded the date in words and the name of the deputy who first supervised repairs. It did not use the word proof, which felt right, because the wall was more than a verdict. Reporters asked Renata if she believed the drywall solved anything that mattered, and she answered with careful honesty and patience. She said it solved whether the cabin hid a message, and it offered a direction for facts to continue breathing. She said the board changed a rumor cloud into a line of checkable points that connected people who had waited years. She also said that what you call proof depends on the room you are standing in and the weight on your heart. The story kept circulating, and people kept walking that turnout and counting the faded stencils with respect and quiet. They looked for signs that someone had tried to speak in a tight corner and had chosen an odd messenger. They bent close to drywall, then stepped back and saw a small room that finally felt less like a tomb. They understood that time can hide a message, and sometimes the wall just needs a steady hand and a simple blade. When Renata thinks about the cabin now, she remembers the hush when the board came free and the pencil marks appeared. She remembers Cleo and Benito telling careful pieces and retired Deputy Kravitz recalling lemonade in a little paper cup. She remembers that proof is a rough word for a gentle thing, which is a voice asking someone to tell a person named Mara. She believes the house did what houses sometimes do, which is hold a note until the right listener finally arrives.